welcome everyone to Are You Revelation Ready? Wow, it's amazing to think that in just 2 more days we will be actually a full year from when we started this study. So much has been revealed in this time, and we just thank the Lord for it. Um, we're grateful for the opportunity to prepare people for the things that are shortly going to come to pass. And we are thankful that we, here living and breathing to continue this study and this journey. So, having said all of that, I pray everyone had a wonderful holiday. That even as we have wrapped up Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, as spoken of, that Yeshua, Jesus, kept in John 10:22, that you are being light and salt, that even though it's an 8-day celebration, we are called to be light and salt every day. In a world where people are lost, the fact that they can find Yeshua and find a refuge in Him is a part of our mandate and a part of our calling. And even more so when we recognize that that day is coming, and even more so when we recognize what time it is. And so without continuing much longer, I would like to go ahead and go to the Lord in prayer as we begin today's study. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. We thank you, we bless you, and we praise you this morning. We lift you up, and we look forward to the things, wonderful things that you are showing us and will continue to show us in your word. Without further ado, the next voice you will hear is that of Charlie McLaughlin.
Shabbat shalom to everyone. That is Sabbath peace. Hope everyone had a great week. We are ready to continue in our study as we come to a close on our study of the book of Revelation concerning being revelation ready. And we are currently, for last week we were in chapter 18. We'll say a little bit about 18 and then, maybe a little, about 18, and then we'll move into chapter 19. As we've outlined the study, first of all, we dealt with the 7 things that we need to repent of in these last days for us to be able to understand the book of Revelation. We then dealt with 7 keys to understanding the book of Revelation. They are essential in understanding the book of Revelation. And then we went into our study. And in our study, we looked at the book of Revelation in terms of the informational chapters, chapters that were not giving us the chronological count of events, sequence of events in Revelation. Chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which were introductory and provided valuable information concerning things that would be happening in the count. In that, it was included the 7 churches, the beginning in chapter 1, giving us a application of one of the 7 keys. One of the major 7 of the 7 keys was that when God counts to 7, in the middle of 7, number 4 is found the main point and the turning point, and that the book of Revelation opens up with that being applied, where you see Yeshua, or the Lord, is standing in the midst of 7 lampstands, and those 7 lampstands are menorah, to be biblically correct. The menorah, 7 menorah, 7-lamp menorah based on what was set up in the holy place, along with the showbread and the golden altar of incense. And that we saw that those 7 lamps, in the midst of them, the one standing was Yeshua. And so even at the beginning, he applies, before we get into the count sequentially, that in the center of 7, you will see the main point and or the turning point. In that case, it was Yeshua, the main point of the 7 churches, which are the 7 represented by the 7 menorah. And those will also occur later on when we got to chapter 11, and identifying the 2 witnesses, that the lampstand, the menorah, the 7-lamp menorah, and the 2 olive trees. So you had the two pipes that poured into the menorah, which were in Zechariah chapter 4, where the 2 witnesses that witnessed, 2 witnesses are the 2 prophets who testified during the Great Tribulation of Revelation 11, 3.5 years, which was 42 months and 1,260 days, when the city of Jerusalem would be trodden underfoot. That is yet to come in the future. And so we went through these informational chapters to see what were the major points, like in Revelation chapter 1, I believe it was verse 18, where it tells us that Yeshua is the one who possesses the keys of death and of hell and of death, which were the central theme of the whole count. The major count being the 7 seals. The 7th seal containing 7 trumpets followed by 7 bowls of wrath, so that all of Revelation that goes up to the return of Yeshua, of Jesus Christ, when he returns to the earth, brings to close the 7th seal, which is also at the 7th bowl of wrath, at the end of the 7th bowl, which we found was in chapter 16, the 7 bowls, which followed the 7 trumpets from chapters 8 to chapter 11, verse 15. So as we went through these, then we went back into informational chapters that, because the sequence started in chapter 8 with the sequence started in chapter 6 with the 6 seals and the destruction that takes place at the end of chapter 6 in the 6th seal is then topped off, or it is finished up with a blessing of the 144,000 being set into action as they are sealed to go through the 7 trumpets of chapter 8 through chapter 11, verse 15. Their ministry. We also notice that when you divided the 144,000 into 2 by 2, based upon the apostolic calling and sending forth, that resulted in 72,000, which happened to be the number of nations supernaturally created by God. That is 70 nations at the Tower of Babel that were formed from Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the 3 sons of Noah. But then 2 others were formed later from one nation, Israel. Israel was then divided after Solomon's death into the northern kingdom, which we continue to maintain the name of Israel, and then the southern kingdom of Judah, which did not have the name but retained the oracles. They maintained the word of God after the northern kingdom was carried away. And those 2 nations that are not of those 2 nations, those who do not serve the Lord in the spirit, that is based upon the promises of God, but claim their allegiance and their claim a right to the blessings of God because of their natural descendancy, they do not count as children of God, because it's only the children of the promise that are counted. So those of the natural that don't believe, they fall into the category of the other 70 nations. So therefore, it comes to a total of 72 nations in the flesh, among which the majority are not believers, but are on the broad road and not on the narrow road that is the straight way in following Yeshua, who is the way, the truth, and the life. So when we got through with chapter 11, we went into informational chapters again after chapter 11, mainly after verse 15, where the seventh trumpet is sounded. And that is the point where 1 Corinthians 15, 51, and 52 particularly, where it speaks of the last trumpet, the time at which the dead would be raised incorruptible, and those who are alive would be changed, and together they would be caught up to meet the Lord in the air, as it also foretold in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. So we see that the rapture, the resurrection, and the rapture speaking of the catching up or the ascension of the church, the saints, the bride of the Lord, into the air after they're raised, resurrected from the dead, is that they meet the Lord in the air. And in the air, that doesn't happen until after the two witnesses. And so the two witnesses are killed and resurrected. And so then the importance of this is that is the last sign before the church is removed. Why? So that the harvest, the final harvest, will be completed with God-given evidence of the proof of the resurrection, with the two witnesses being raised before the church is, so that the church will be able to finish its mission, the commission of the Lord, to preach the gospel in all the earth, beginning at Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. Because when those two witnesses are raised, they will be the sign of the Son of Man that will show the world that the gospel is true, that it actually took place as recorded in the Bible. And that will be the last opportunity for many to fear God and give glory to God and get saved. Because shortly after that, the church is caught up in chapter 11, verse 15, which is the last trumpet. And so it doesn't mention the church being caught up at that time, because Paul has already established when that would happen, at the last trumpet. Now, we went on from there to see that chapter 12 was connected directly with chapter 11 in terms of being the same time frame, where the woman is in the wilderness for 1,260 days. It's expressed in verse 6 that way, and then in verse 14 it's expressed that she is in the wilderness for a time, times, and half a time, which equate Daniel's time, times, and half a time with the 1,260 days being the same, both being 3.5 years. So that speaks of the Great Tribulation, which starts when Satan is cast down in Revelation 12. Or as they say in the King James, say he's taken out of the way. The word way literally meaning the middle. That is the middle heaven. There are three heavens as recorded in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, I think around verse 3, but in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul speaks of the third heaven, one being caught up to the third heaven, the middle heaven being the planetary heaven beyond the earth's atmosphere, and then the third heaven being God's throne. The first, of course, being where the birds fly, airplanes fly, where we have our atmosphere in the earth. So, chapter 12 and chapter 13, informational chapter, also gave us a connection to the chapter 11 by telling us that the first beast, which we identify as the United Nations, the first beast of Revelation 13, has authority to persecute the church, to make war against the saints, as it says. And that is for 42 months. That 42 months would correspond to, again, chapter 11, the Great Tribulation. But this 42 months, apparently, based upon the order in which it happens, doesn't start until after the beast of Revelation chapter 13 receives the deadly head wound. That is, the wound to the destroying of its headquarters. The United Nations is headquartered in New York, where it has been since 1947. It was formed in 1945. And so, with that, we see that in Revelation 13, additional information is given concerning this beast being worshipped between verses 1 and 10, but that this beast also has, is the same beast. The first beast of chapter 13 is the same beast as the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7, with the qualities of the previous three beasts of Daniel chapter 7, which were the lion, the bear, and the leopard. Those all being mentioned in chapter 13 as well as qualities of the fourth beast, which is the United Nations. And geographically, we understood that the first beast of Daniel chapter 7, the lion, represented Britain, Great Britain, and then the bear represented the Soviet Union, and then the leopard represented Germany, Hitler, because it was at that time when Germany tried to take the world in World War II, but was defeated by the Allied powers, and they came in and partitioned Germany and took control. And at that time, they also formed the United Nations in 1945. Their meeting at their headquarters, the determined headquarters in 1947, was also at the same time that Israel was declared in modern times a nation again, recognized as a nation by the United Nations. But the United Nations wanted them to be formed in terms of a democracy, which God did not create Israel as a democracy. They were created as a theocracy under God's rule, under God's government, as the kingdom of God. But again, because they failed at that, they were punished, as the scripture declared. And we went through a lot of the details on that. But go on in terms of what we covered. We went on to in chapter 13 to see that the beast, the second beast, is the one that is called later in Revelation the false prophet. He is the one who implements the religious worship of the beast, the first beast, being tied to the economy, where he implements the mark of the beast by telling the people to make an image of the beast, and that the image, the name, the number of the beast was 666, and that those who did not receive that image, worship that beast, receive that image in their foreheads, in their hand, that they would be killed. And so we see this is what would take place during the 42-month period, if not starting just before that, that during that time, many will be killed because they will refuse to take the mark of the beast. But to take it means certain confinement in the future to the lake of fire and brimstone with no possibility of, after taking the mark, repenting and coming back to God. So it is very important that we understand these things because these systems are already in place and being implemented even as we speak. And they are being made ready for when Satan is cast down from heaven. In chapter 13, we then go on into chapter 14, which gave us information. So with chapter 12, chapter 13 were clearly aligned with chapter 11 because of the timing of the 42 months being mentioned in each, and also the 1,260 days. But they also were tied to the events of chapter 11 by the seven heads and the 10 horns that were mentioned. And in addition to that, it was mentioned of 10 crowns, 7 crowns, were also mentioned, which we can go back to Daniel and Daniel chapter 7 and see additional information on that. But then in chapter 14, it's summarized as chapter 7 did with the 144,000. It summarized them and their mission as in terms of harvesting, doing the work of God in the earth, and that the harvest was great from every nation. But in addition to what chapter 7 highlighted, chapter 14, because this is after the rapture, the resurrection and ascension of the saints, that it now also mentions in chapter 14 the harvest of the grapes of wrath, which is the bowls of wrath that will follow being mentioned in chapter 15 and implemented in chapter 16. And so we went through chapter 16, which is after the church has been removed, and then the bowls of wrath are poured out full measure. What were the things that we poured out without mixture, without dilution, full strength of God's wrath, the winepress of the wrath of God? And we saw this at the beginning. Again, one of our major keys was that in Jeremiah, God spoke of a full end of all nations. What nations? All nations where the children of Israel, that is the house of Israel and the house of Judah, have been scattered. That he would judge those nations and make a full end of them, but he promised that he would not make a full end of the house of Israel and the house of Judah, his people. Well, on what basis? The establishment of the new covenant with them, which is also in Jeremiah. But they would not go unpunished, but they would be punished in measure. We saw that measure broke down into the 3 categories of the seals, 7, followed by the 7 trumpets, then the second measure, and then the third, after the church being removed, the bowls of wrath, where the full end occurred. But the first 2 were partial judgments upon the body of Christ, but the house of Israel and the house of Judah, to try them, to get them ready to be with the Lord. And that the first one was in the seals aimed at the house of Israel, which was basically and is basically located in the United States, in North America, primarily North and South America, but primarily North America. And then the Judah, the house of Judah, which had returned home already in the land. And so we see that the judgment there, the first one, the house of Israel, was in by a fraction of 1/4. It gave us the measure 1/4. Right in the middle, it gave it in the 4th seal, the measure being 1/4 of mankind dying. And then when you get into the trumpets, it highlighted that most everything centered around Judah, and Judah is where the Great Tribulation occurs. But even before that, you see the 1/3 measures from chapter 8 being counted off as the fractional measures of judgments are in thirds. But when we got to chapter 16, these seven bowls of wrath, there are no partial judgments. It is the full wrath of God poured out upon those who remain on the earth after the last trumpet. And so then when we got into chapter 17, we saw the judgment of, speak of the judgment of the great, the whore, mystery Babylon, written on her forehead. Excuse me. The judgment of the whore is distinguished from the judgment of the government because the whore speaks of a religious Babylon. So understand, it's a religious Babylon. And the Greco-Roman religion, or you might say it this way, the three religious entities are three religious divisions in the earth. Those who call their leaders father, those who call their leaders rabbi, and those who call their leaders masters, all mentioned in Matthew chapter 23 by Yeshua, by Jesus, that his people, his disciples, were not to be called fathers, not to be called, and we're talking about from a religious standpoint, not about a family, but not to be called fathers, not to be called rabbis, and not to be called masters, because there were only one Father, God the Father, Elohim the Father, Yehovah, his name, which is shared with his Son and the Spirit, and that there was only one Rabbi, Yeshua, one Master, Yeshua. He alone is our Lord and Master. And so those who take him at his word, they will not submit to those designations or anything like that, which are based upon the doctrine which he told us in the writing to the seven churches, that he told us that he hated it because it was the Nicolaitan doctrine, which dealt with Nico, the conquering of the laity, conquering of the people. The word lay speaks of people. The word Nico speaks of conquer, to conquer the people, to conquer the laity. And they instituted a distinction of class where the leadership is above the people, and by class distinction. And Yeshua did not do this for his disciples, but every disciple was said that they were all to be recognized amongst themselves as brethren, and only he would, and the Father would be called Father, and only Yeshua would be the Rabbi and the Master. So this is important. Why? Because in that chapter is where, in Matthew 23, is where he pronounced the severe woes, W-O-E-S plural, woes, but multiple woes upon the scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, and those who were like them, who call themselves fathers or masters, because of that wicked doctrine that Satan uses to dominate people from a religious standpoint. And those woes are mentioned in Revelation as the three major categories of judgment that come against those who do such things. And those started in chapter 5. We saw that with the locust, the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit named Abaddon, Apollyon, which means to destroy or the destroyer. That's the first woe. The second woe is in the, that's it, that was the fifth trumpet, which is in chapter 9. The second woe starts in chapter 9 with the sixth trumpet beginning. And in the sixth trumpet, the woes go all the way, the second woe goes all the way through to the great tribulation until after the great tribulation, when the last trumpet, the seventh trumpet, is sounded in chapter 11, verse 15, bringing the second woe to an end, and then the third woe being the wrath of God in all of the seven bowls of wrath. And that seventh woe ending with Yeshua's return to the earth. And so that return to the earth is where we are approaching in our study. But then we looked at chapter 17 and chapter 18, and we saw that Babylon is mentioned as the whore of Babylon in chapter 17, which is religious. The whore is a counterfeit of the church. They believe in the sun god worship. They December 25th, which was originally the winter solstice, which today occurs on the 21st, the first day of winter, the shortest day, the darkest day of the year, by virtue of the least amount of sunlight time in a day is on that day, the first day of winter, called the winter solstice. And that was the day that the abomination took place at, initially after Daniel's time, as Daniel had prophesied. And from that, the holy day of a national holiday called Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, mentioned in John chapter 10, verse 22, which is also called the Feast of Light, during which Yeshua, from chapter 8, verse 12, through chapter 10, around verse 38, 39, he taught that he was the light of the world, proved he was the light of the world, healing a man that had never seen the light of day. And he dealt with the false shepherds and identified himself as the good shepherd. He identified the enemy as the one that comes to steal, kill, and destroy in that same chapter, in chapter 10. And so we see that in the time of the abomination, that Hanukkah, Feast of Dedication, which is historically in direct competition with the worship that occurred on December 25th, and also during the spring in worship of the Queen of Heaven, which is called Ishtar, Diana of the Ephesians, called Easter, that these idolatrous major idols, along with their idolatrous idol Tammuz, who is supposedly the Queen of Heaven's son, which becomes identified with the tree that's mentioned in mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 10, basically verses 1 through 5, where they decorate the tree with silver and gold. That these are the practices going on in the end time, the idolatry that God will be bringing under his judgment, along with all of the idols, so-called idols of the earth, of the world. And so it's important why we mention that, because this is the season, the time that this is going on currently in the earth. And it's very important that God's people come out of these Babylonian forms of religion, so that they do not partake in the sin of idolatry, and partake of the plagues that will be coming in full strength after the church who has been purified from these things by the washing of water with the word of God and with the fiery trial that is going to remove the wrinkles from the bride of Yeshua. And so today we were, as in last week, we were in chapter 18, and we saw in chapter 18 of Revelation, as in 17, that it focuses on Babylon, where chapter 17 was a religious Babylon, spoken of as the whore, the judgment on the great whore. Chapter 18 is dealing primarily with a merchant Babylon who is empowered by the connection with the government. And so we see that there were three major Babylons. That was Ham's Babylon, where Nimrod was the major figure at the Tower of Babel. Then we have Shem's Babylon, which was identified by Nebuchadnezzar at Babylon, which is near Iraq, modern-day Iraq. And then we have the final Babylon represented in the United Nations, which is Japheth's Babylon. And Japheth is largely, when we say Shem, Shem is the people that are called Semitic, not just Jews, but all of the descendants of Shem, where if you go back to Genesis chapter 10, you can see what nations and their locations that descended from Shem, as well as the two other brothers, Ham and Japheth. But Japheth comes to represent most of your nations that move to the north and to the west from the land, from the Holy Land. And they are generally identified as their power is consolidated based upon them utilizing color. That is to use the false doctrine of evolution to implicate them and to identify them as to be supreme over the other brothers of Noah's sons, and they are basically concentrated in their power structure in the West, in Europe and the United States, and the nations that are allied with them. And so they are now getting their just time being Babylon. And so in chapter 18, now we notice that in chapters 12, chapter 13, and chapter 17, the 7 heads and 10 horns were mentioned. And that gave us plenty of information along with the timings in those chapters of where 42 months or 1,260 days or time and times, half a time, connected them directly with the abomination of desolation of chapter 11, where the 1,260 days are also mentioned along with the 42 months in verses 3 and 2 of Revelation 11. But now we look at chapter 18, and we read it up on last week. Last week we were out with the grandkids in Texas. We took them by the Creation Museum, the Institute for Creation Research, located in near Dallas, Texas. And it was a wonderful experience because it showed them, they were the grandkids, 3 and 7, on a walkthrough tour, walk through the history as it deals with science, and they had the Tyrannosaurus standing real tall there, animated, along with some other of creatures that were animated. But it actually set forth the case for the biblical creation taking place only about 6,000, to be exact, 6,024 years ago. And how that the science supports the biblical record of creation according to Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through chapter 2, verse 3, along also with the information of chapter 2, all the way down to explaining what happened to cause the fossil record, the death of a lot of these animals, the formation of the earth as it is, how it is now, as a result of the flood of Noah. So these are all very important because this is the primary doctrine that Japheth takes in idolatrous rejection of the true God, to say there is no God, to make mankind God on earth, with no supernatural God existing. This is their doctrine, and it is the official doctrine of the public schools in the U.S., in Britain, and throughout the nations of the world, who all go under the guise of providing a Greek education. Generally in from preschool through 12th grade, and then on through college. The degrees are based upon this philosophy that is passed on through the Greco-Roman worldview, the worldview that is based on idolatry, but yet exalts Zeus, the Olympian gods, false gods of Greece, and that go back to the Tower of Babel. So this is all very important because this is the major lie that Satan has used to derail many believers by rejecting the truth of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, that in the beginning God, Elohim, created the heavens and the earth. Actually, it says Elohim Aleph Tav. Aleph Tav is Aleph Tav, two-letter word, which equates in the Greek to Alpha Omega, which refers to Elohim, who is God, but with him, who is also God, is the Aleph Tav, or the Alpha Omega, which we see in Revelation is Yeshua, and which was Yeshua from the very first verse. That did not occur in the King James translation because they deleted him in those, as he's revealed in those two character word, the Aleph Tav, the S, that he is the first and the last, the first and the letters that represent the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. But when translated into Greek, become Alpha and Omega, the first and last characters of the Greek alphabet. But in the Hebrew alphabet, they are picture characters, and it depicts the Aleph as an ox. Think of our capital A with the little crossbar in the middle, extended out just a little bit on both sides, the horns of an ox, which represents strength. And then the Tav being the cross, the literal sign of the covenant, the character that is used to speak of him, the last character of the Hebrew alphabet, but him coming first. The last is first and the first is last. So instead of coming as the ox with the horns, which represented the crown and the power of his dominion and rule, that first is last and the last is first. So he comes as the one who is going to be the sign of the covenant, hang on the sign of the covenant, a cross, a tav, to save people first, and then return as the conquering king, as the son of David. So first he's the son of Joseph. Joseph's mission was to save many people through his service, his servitude. But then as the son of David, he comes back as the conquering king, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, which is the time we're in now as he's preparing for his return, as he's cleaning up his bride to be with him before he pours out full wrath. The time of God's vengeance began in the year of 9/11, 6001 from Adam, with the first seal. And now we're at the third seal. And so with that, we go into the book of Revelation, chapter 18. We saw that he said, after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. Excuse me, the word great used here is the Greek word megas, where we get mega as in million, mega. It speaks of great power, and the word power there is exousia. It means authority. And it's the same word that speaks of Babylon the Great, great being mega. And so where does this Babylon the Great fit into the time scheme of chapters of the seven seals, the seven trumpets, and the seven bowls? Well, we saw in chapter 17 that was the religious Babylon, and we know that whore, represented by the false bride, is basically the Greco-Roman religion, along with the other religions of the world that are based upon those three leadership designations, where the woes were pronounced in Matthew 12. Excuse me. Some water, thank you. And so we see that in chapter 17, the judgment on the whore who is set on seven, who had set on seven heads. Remember, there were seven. How did it say? It was seven heads on this beast. And in chapter 17, it told us that those seven heads were seven mountains where the woman sat. Then it also told us later that there were seven kings. When it told us there were seven kings, it revealed that of those seven kings in chapter 17, verse 10, that five were fallen and one still existed at the time John wrote Revelation. And the seventh one was yet to come. And that the seventh one, when he came, that will only be in power for a short space. We were able to see by going back to history that the last five were revealed to Nebuchadnezzar, him being the first of the last five. But the first two go back to Babel and the Assyrian Empire. Babel, Nimrod, in the plain of Shinar at Babel, the city called Babel, where the tower was built, was the first Babylon. The second one was the Assyrian kingdom. Some might argue and say, well, the second one was the Egyptian kingdom during the time of the Exodus. But the Egyptian kingdom was just a continuation of Ham's dominion over Babylon. Because Ham had 4 sons. Cush was the one under whom Babel, the Tower of Babel, Nimrod, under the Tower of Babel in chapter 11 of Genesis, was instituted. But Ham's other sons were put in Libya, and other sons were Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is translated as Egypt. That's where Egypt comes in. And then the fourth son being Canaan. Those were the ones that were, after Tower of Babel, that had the residual world power. That is, Egypt had the residual world power. And then Canaan had its main hold in the Promised Land. And God brought them all down. Canaan was supposed to be completely annihilated, but they did not kill all the Canaanites as they were instructed by Yah. 7 nations that were connected with the Canaanites in the land of the Promised Land, the land of Canaan, which is the land of Ham, which was an extension of Ham from Egypt into what is modern day, which is called the Holy Land. So we align them under Ham, and so that when you get the next major Babylon, because there are 3 major ones, but there are a total of 7 kingdoms that display Babylon's influence in the world. The first is the Tower of Babel, which is Ham in power. That power ends with the destruction of Egypt, and then with the conquering of Canaan, bringing Ham's rule to an end as God's people go forth into the Promised Land. But then the second one, because God's people do not do what they're supposed to do, that rises is Semitic, Shem. The word Semitic comes from the word Shem. It drops the H because there is no Sheen character in the English or in the Greek alphabet. It's just a S, where Hebrew has both, a SH character called a Sheen, and it has a Samic, which is a S character. So it ends up being shortened to Semitic instead of Shemitic, but it's referencing the descendants of Shem, which are more than Jews. They're all the descendants of Shem, which include Abraham's brothers, Nahor and Haran, their children, Lot, the child of Abraham's brother Haran, who apparently had died or was no longer alive when Lot was accompanied Abraham in his departure and going into Canaan. And it also included other nations of Shem. And so we're not going to go into a lot of the detail there, but Elam was one of them, which is located there at the location of Iraq and Iran, Medo-Persia. And goes on and on. But in Genesis 10, you go back and see that in the table. And so we said, what? Let's go through the count again, those 7. They were Nimrod's Babylon, the Tower of Babel, located the city of Babel. Then you had the Assyrian, who becomes next. They are at Nineveh. Jonah has to go preach to them. He doesn't want to because they're mean. They're wicked. And he knew it, but God wanted to show mercy to the most wicked people on the earth. He extended his mercy because he came to seek the lost. They needed the physician. not those who are well. And all have sinned and come short. And so after the Assyrian kingdom, then you got the last five, starting with Nebuchadnezzar. And these are revealed in chapter 2 in the image, in the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And Nebuchadnezzar is the third, but the first of the last five, counting from his time, based on the gold image with the head of gold, the chest of silver, waist of bronze, legs of iron, and the 10 toes part iron and clay. So to get the total, where you based in Revelation chapter 17, verse 10, is you have Babel, Nimrod, you have Assyria, Nineveh is the capital. Then you have the Semitic kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, which is was headquartered at Babylon. And then you have, after him, the Medo-Persian, where the Persians become the dominant of the two. That's Iraq, Iran, with Iran becoming more dominant as the Persian Empire. During the time where we see them being brought down is when the king who married Esther is at war with the Greeks, which followed next, the waist of bronze. And then the Greeks were conquered. Alexander was the primary figure beginning the Greek, the Japheth's rule began with Alexander the Great. He was a single horn, the first king of the goats. And then he fell to Rome. And Rome is the one that was at the time John wrote Revelation, which is identified in chapter 17, verse 10. The seventh Babylon, the seventh king, a nation, which is Japheth still in rulership, but in the form of the United Nations. And this is where Japheth will be brought down in the book of Revelation, as his brothers Ham and Shem were. And the issue is over the children of Israel, and the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And it's the cup of trembling, Jerusalem, to the whole world. And Satan will take his final stand in the earth against the nation, in the nation of Israel. It won't be his final stand against them, but it'll be his final stand actually in Israel, in the land, is when he is cast down from the third heaven and becomes of the seventh, which is the United Nations, will become the eighth, which is of the seventh, along with the 10 horns, which are on the seventh, which is the United Nations. Of which among those 10 horns, Daniel talks about 3 of them being plucked up, which would leave 7 out of 10. And this is spoken of again in the book of Revelation. But the 10 horns are not destroyed. They all are maintained, but 3 come under his direct influence because of where he is located and reigning from. Perhaps as we close, we'll go back and highlight who the beast and the Antichrist is, but I did give you a reference book that you could get that is written by one Jew that has followed him since the 1987 to now, and he's written a book that is quite detailed on identifying the wicked prince whose time has come. He's no longer prince now; he's king. And so you know who I'm referencing, the king. And so we are now going to look at chapter 18. What will actually spur off his power beginning is what we see in chapter 18 of Revelation, which is referred to. Now, the religious Babylon will basically be dealt with in the 16 chapter 16, the 7 bowls of God's wrath, because he will use the beast along with the 10 horns, which represent the 10 kings who have not received a kingdom as yet, but will reign with the beast, will be power to reign with the beast for 1 hour, to destroy the whore, because God has put it and will put it into their heart to not only to make her naked and to burn her, because they have a hatred for her. This was in chapter 17 was revealed. But then in chapter 18 we deal with another aspect of Babylon, and this one is merchant. And so in verse 2 where we were, he cried mightily, this angel that came down from heaven, descended from heaven with great megas power, authority. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, is fallen. So for reference here, we want to look at chapter 18, verse 2, a little closely, more closely. Note the term, Babylon the great, where the whore was identified as Mystery Babylon in chapter 17, based upon religion, going from the Tower of Babel, the Queen of Heaven, Easter, Baal, all of those religious worship attributed based on December 12th and Easter time, the winter solstice and the spring solstice, along with their idolatrous son Tammuz, who was supposed to be killed at age 40. And they had 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, which is in Ezekiel chapter 8, when Ezekiel is instructed by Jehovah, by God, to look through the hole in the wall. And he sees the women weeping for Tammuz. He sees the men with their backs turned to the temple, and they worshiping the sun god. So you got all of this, which came from the first Babylon, but goes down through all of these seven heads, and all ended up caught up in this worship that was instituted at the Tower of Babel, but multiplied as the languages were formed into different nation language groups. Family groups were formed into different 70 basic nation groups, and then it even overtook the house of Israel and the house of Judah as they submitted and succumbed to these same idols when they refused to keep the Torah. Their redemption is because they have a new covenant that was promised to them, which Yeshua fulfilled and is still fulfilling by cleaning up his body, preparing his bride to be with him, which ends with the resurrection at the last trumpet. Now, notice again, we said in verse, Tori, for those who will be watching online, Revelation 18, verse 2, we'll have a parallel passage over there in Revelation on the Old Covenant, the Tanak. And we see there's a mention of Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. So what I want to instruct you is, if you do a search on Babylon, verses that contain Babylon fallen, the word Babylon and fallen, by doing a search of the Bible for those two words that occur in verses, what comes up in this search, and I'll read this, I'll tell you what's on the screen if you only have your phone and won't have the visual of the Bible we have on screen. Isaiah chapter 21, verse 9. So we're going to say, write these verses down. Isaiah chapter 21, verse 9. Then Jeremiah chapter 51, 5:1, chapter 51, verse 8. And then the last two mentioned, therefore, the last two mentions are Revelation 14, verse 8, and Revelation 18, verse 2, which is the verse we're at in Revelation. Now, with that being stated, we'll just read what those four verses say right now, all the way down to our current verse. So Isaiah 21, verse 9 says, And behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, is fallen, And all the graven images of her gods he has broken unto the ground. I'll read that again. And behold, here cometh a chariot, a chariot of men, with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground. This is a direct reference from a quote in Revelation 18 because fallen is used twice. Babylon the Great, it doesn't say Babylon the Great, it just says Babylon, but it says is fallen, which is being quoted in Revelation chapter 18, verse 2. Babylon the Great is fallen. It goes on to say, and is become the habitation of devils, that's where it being there, demons, and the whole of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. That's the fourth mention. The second mention was in Jeremiah 51, verse 8, which says, Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her. Take balm for her pain. If so be, she may be healed. Remember one of our major keys, that God declares the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done. Meaning if you go back into the Tanak, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, the Psalms, that you will find God has already written the future in the history of his story. History according to God's perspective. And he's foretold us the things that are happening from ancient times and even from the beginning. So from Genesis on through the prophets and the writings, God has already laid out the events of Revelation, but scattered them in verses or in passages like a jigsaw puzzle, so that they could not be discerned by the princes of this world until Yeshua had come and finished what he had done. And then he reveals to his disciples all that the Father had shown him, as he says in John chapter 15. He held nothing back that the Father showed him. He revealed all to his disciples, his friends, the ones who keep his commandments. So that's a priority and a key qualification on getting revelation of these things, is that we must be keeping the commandments and the faith of Yeshua. The commandments of God and the faith of Yeshua, the faith of Jesus, in endurance, in patience. So, the next time Babylon, the third time Babylon is fallen, that's mentioned again as the great city, is in Revelation chapter 14, verse 8. And here he is connecting Babylon. I'll read it. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So now, I'm going to encourage you to read these four passages and read at least the whole chapters in which they occur. Because what happened with Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, and that's the Babylon at the time of Isaiah that is going to exist. Isaiah prophesies it. He is going to mention Elam. Elam is one of the descendants of Shem. Elam, if you look, is located near the river Euphrates, there in the region of Iraq and Iran. Elam. He will also mention the Medes. The Medes. And you will see that the Medes, again, you're dealing with the nations of Iraq, the nations of Iran, which are going to be mentioned in Jeremiah, chapter 51, verse 8, in the prophecies of Jeremiah. And you might have to start with chapter 50 and go through chapter 52. But it's dealing with Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, but at the same time, it's prophesying an end-time Babylon. How do we know this is not just about Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon? Because Revelation chapter 14, verse 8, and chapter 18, verse 2 say this Babylon exists in the last days events of Revelation. And Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon is not rising again. But it is a precursor showing us where the modern day Babylon, which is constituted in the seventh head, which is the United Nations, which now is in Japheth's, under Japheth's control. So where we've been looking at in terms of white people in control, whites against black or darker people of the earth dominating them, it's not that way in the scripture. God lets us know that it's going to be an issue. He prophesied that. But he looks at them based upon their national origin and their languages, their culture, their religious worship, which identifies them doing the same thing that happened in the previous two brothers of sons of Noah, the two brothers, Ham and Shem, and particularly tied to Shem here, because Nebuchadnezzar is Shem's time. And so with these scriptures, I'm going to ask Tori to do a search on Great Babylon and in the book of Daniel. So in addition to these, we're going to find Great Babylon, where they occur in Daniel. Because and this is it. In Nebuchadnezzar's Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, time of where Daniel is in captivity, but it has been promoted. In chapter 4 of Daniel, verse 30, you will see a quote from the king, Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Why do we go here? Because Nebuchadnezzar tells us some things that happened with this last modern day Babylon. That also occurs with all 7 kingdoms that lead up to this United Nations kingdom. The one who becomes the 8th, the king over the new United Nations, the one who will rule it, who will be empowered by Satan, he is going to boast in his pride. And he's going to declare himself as God above everything that is worshiped. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 reveals this concerning the son of perdition, who is called the man of sin, which we often identify as the Antichrist or anti-Messiah, who will turn all of his fierce wrath as God allows him in judgment upon the woes that will particularly hit in the trumpets, but especially in the 6th trumpet in Revelation chapter 11, the time of the Great Tribulation. He will be boasting himself as God above all that is called God. Daniel chapter 7 brings this out as the United Nations, the 4th beast, which has the qualities of the previous 3 beasts, as revealed as the first beast excuse me, of Revelation chapter 13. It is the second beast of Revelation chapter 13 that is going to add enforce the religious aspect of worshiping him by worshiping his image, taking his mark, whose number is 666, in the forehead or in the hand. Now, if I can mention like the right hand, but in the hand, or having the number of that name of the beast. And so Nebuchadnezzar, though Nebuchadnezzar gets humbled, he spends, notice it connects Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4. We go there, verse 30. So that's to be added to those 4 scriptures. So 5 scriptures there, basic scripture references, that we get from just verse 2 of Revelation 18. That this is when Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel had already prophesied about what was going to happen to him in the previous verses above verse 30 in chapter 4. But you look what happens to him after he utters the words, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom, by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty?" Look at the pride of this king. Verse 31, look what happens. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen." And notice, "and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomever he will." Whosoever he will, excuse me. And so notice in that pronouncement in verse 32 that Jehovah, God, makes it clear that no matter what evil kingdom is ruling, he rules over the kingdom of men. So when they rule, God overrules. And so they do nothing except God permits or allows them to do so. And because we are in the days as the 7 begin, this is connecting that 7 times. It was a reference to Revelation, that this judgment comes to be revealed in Revelation as God overrules the United Nations and its powered and its member nations that will ultimately come against Jerusalem, come against Israel, come against Judah. And so we see that he spent 7 years. And what happens? The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. And at the end of days, notice who's speaking here. This is Nebuchadnezzar himself. "I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or say unto him, what doest thou? At the same time, this is Nebuchadnezzar speaking. So this is not just Daniel. This Daniel writing what Nebuchadnezzar said. Daniel would have been a witness to what Nebuchadnezzar said. A false witness is someone who didn't actually witness something. You could report it, but if you did not have a witness and testify of the witness who saw it. So while Nebuchadnezzar speaks this, Daniel is the one who records it as the witness of what he said. And at the same time, Nebuchadnezzar speaking, my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me, and my counselors and my lords sought unto me. And I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor. Where are we at? Okay, and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, that's righteousness or justice. And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. And so Nebuchadnezzar, we see, is the third kingdom, the one representing Shem, dominion. Nebuchadnezzar actually acknowledges God as Lord and King over himself. And as a result of that, you don't hear much about him in the history books in the public schools, because Satan has kind of moved him from the record. But yet he is the most dominant Babylon after the Tower of Babel. First Nimrod, Ham, but here Shem. He's Semitic of Shem. He is the greatest power, counting from the last five. He is the first of the last five kingdoms, and he is the central one, where Shem has had the power of being reigning in Babylon. He is the central figure, and the implication is here that he got saved, even though his kingdom is going to still be brought down, as he was shown by Daniel in chapter 2, Daniel interpreting his dream, the image, where it's one person standing, but the head is Nebuchadnezzar, gold. The chest is the Medo-Persians, who take down his actual descendant, Belshazzar, who is with the writing on the wall, where he's been weighed in the balance. That was the end of Nebuchadnezzar's dynasty reigning. And the Medo-Persians took over, and the Persians became dominant. And that leads you down into the time of Esther and her husband being the Persian king, as he is going to war. Ahasuerus, Esther's husband, is going to war against Greece. So now it passes from silver to the Greeks, Alexander the Great, the bronze waist, and then the Greeks are conquered by Rome, and Rome is the one that's in power during the time of Yeshua, the time that John writes the Revelation. And now we're at the final Babylon, the United Nations. So chapter 18 is not dealing so much with the religious Babylon, but it's primarily, we see from verse 3. But all three deal with religion, economics, the money, and also the government. And so we see, for all nations have drunken, back in Revelation chapter 18, verse 3, have drunken of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. You will see that this speaks here, these very things that are spoken in chapter 18 are spoken concerning the city of Tyre, Now you say, why Tyre? Tyre is the focal point of the prophecy of Lucifer falling from heaven. You have the king of Tyre, you have the prince of Tyre. And at that time, but for your information, Tyre was where David's friend Hiram was reigning during the time of David king, and also while Solomon was king. Because he was David's friend, Solomon was able to employ his services in providing materials for the building of the temple. Hiram was also given land in the promised land by Solomon in the region of Galilee. There were more than one city that was given to him as a reward for his service in serving David and in serving Solomon in the building of the temple and the house of the king. Hiram had a dynasty. When Hiram's dynasty in Tyre fell, it fell to those who were of the priestly class in Tyre. And a particular man came to power subsequently, after several overturns there, named Ethbal. Ethbal, who became king of Tyre, was the father of Jezebel, who married Ahab. Why is this significant? Because Jezebel is the central figure in the churches concerning the time of the Great Tribulation, and how she used Baal worship in a way that it had not been done by many of the worst nations. She implemented a form of Baal worship whereby she took authority over her husband, usurped Ahab's authority to get things done. He liked the vineyard. Nabal, one of his neighbors' vineyards, he wanted, but he couldn't get him to sell it. When she heard him tell how sad he was about it, she had the man killed, murdered in Jezreel. Murdered him so her husband could get the vineyard. That was his inheritance. She's killing the prophets of Baal, responsible for the death. And so you look at the history. And so why I mention this, because the context of the final judgment on Satan in Isaiah 14 takes place in the context of Tyre. Tyre's judgment, as mentioned elsewhere, is recorded in Revelation 18, but it's not the Tyre, because that Tyre fell to Alexander the Great. That Tyre was an island merchant. It was wealth. It was where the East met West in wealth. What's the word I'm looking for? The import, the export, the transfer of wealth, and exchange of wealth in the merchant trades from west to east. All of the isles in the Mediterranean, that's Europe and North Africa, the Mediterranean, European nations, Russia, all them, those nations that lie north of the Mediterranean Sea and south, which is northern Africa, all the way over to Egypt, and then into Israel, and then up to in Lebanon, where we have Tyre and Sidon. Tyre became the focus of the prophecy concerning the Revelation 12 fall of Satan, Lucifer, from heaven, one who weakened the nation. It is not about his first fall before Adam fell. It's about his final fall, because it's talking about after nations existed that he brought down these nations, and he conquers these nations. And so it's speaking of the Revelation 12 fall, which is also 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the only one that is called a son of perdition like Judas was, because he's a traitor to his own. And we find that the Antichrist will be of descent from the crown of Solomon, a king who has the bloodline of David in his fleshly genes, but his heart is wicked. So here in chapter 18, as I mentioned, you go back to look at the judgment on Tyre. Now, Tyre, what I mentioned, I said Alexander the Great actually was the one who finally conquered, brought Tyre's fall. They put up a great resistance to Alexander the Great. But what Alexander the Great, because Tyre there was the island of Tyre that was located out, like in the bay, out in the Mediterranean, off the coast. So, and there was a continental Tyre. It had two locations. One was like on the land, and the other one was out in the middle of the water. And the main one was the one out in the middle of the water because its harbors, the harbor was where the ships coming in from the west, from as far as the North America, Britain, Spain, and you just go on down the Mediterranean coast coming back. The seven churches where all they were located there in Turkey, and in North Africa you got Libya, you had Morocco, you have all of these nations, Egypt, all of them in that channel coming into the Mediterranean all the way up to Tyre. And it was the merchant city. And it was conquered when Alexander the Great tried to attack him, and he had difficulty. The siege lasted for a long time on that island, Tyre. But finally what he did, he took a lot of the ruins of old Tyre, the other Tyre, mainland Tyre, the city on mainland, and he used it to throw wood, trees, and debris in to build a bridge that he could cross over out to that island. And when he finally got there, he destroyed Tyre. And over time, Tyre was covered and basically buried with water. And you can read the history on it and Google where it's located in modern times and what's become of it, but it's no longer great like it was. I've looked at some of the archaeological pictures of Tyre, which you can get if you have a Bible, a modern Bible encyclopedia called a Bible dictionary. It's like a biblical encyclopedia, and there are a number of them that have pictures of these sites that you can see as they exist right now. But that Tyre, as well as Babylon, which were brought down, they're mentioned again in terms of their equivalent in the end times. So where you have on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, the major center of trade connecting east to west, the modern day center of trade in the world is where the World Trade Center is located, in the harbor state of New York. And so you have the judgment that comes on Babylon in the last days. Revelation chapter 18 is dealing with the one whose merchants are the merchants of the earth, who are waxed rich because of through the abundance of her delicacies. And so you have the modern day equivalent of this in New York. And in verse 4, back in Revelation chapter 18, verse 4, he said, "And I heard another voice from heaven say, 'Come out of her, my people.'" This is one of the verses that gives us context in time. Not only the phrase "Great Babylon is fallen" tells you that this is a Babylon that is great, and it is great based on the chapter because of its mercantile, its economic activity, its merchants, and God is people lives there. So this is speaking of a place where in the last days his people, his disciples, the followers of Yeshua, the followers of Christ. He's saying, come out of her, my people. Why? That ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to the work in the cup which she hath filled to her double. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen. That idol that is represented there is out in the harbor of New York. And it's called the Statue of Liberty. And that queen, that idol, traces back even to the worship of Ishtar, Easter. Libertarius. And she said, I am no widow. She said, I sit as a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. But what happens? Verse 8 says, therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament her for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And who? The merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her. For no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all fine wood and all manner vessels of ivory and all manner vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. So all this activity is going through New York Harbor, the World Trade Center, the center of world trade, the center of the dollar, where our economic strength, Wall Street, formerly the largest slave market in the East. Well, Walmart, the stock exchange, Wall Street, the New York Stock Exchange is currently located. Also, New York is where the world government, which we already have now clearly proven is the United Nations based on Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation chapter 13. And with additional scriptures that identify it is the only one world government, and it is the head that must be wounded is in New York, where it has been headquartered since 1947. And so, where do we read how it's going to be destroyed in 1 hour? That was in Zechariah chapter 5. Remember the 4 horses? Which actually could be birds, and we find out were birds in the seals, at least the first 2 seals and the 3rd seal. The first 2 clearly, because they were 9/11, dealing with a white horse, Javan, Japheth, is in power now. Japheth starts with Alexander the Great, but he ends in his greatest power in the United Nations, represented in those who are the founding members, permanent members of the United Nations currently. And so you can do a little reading up on the United Nations and its formation and who actually is running it right now and what nations have permanent membership and have historically been in the seats of authority since they were conceived in the League of Nations. And when it folded, all of that it was doing was passed into under the United Nations. Headquartered in New York. Zechariah 5 reveals the destruction of the headquarters, this city, this great merchant city where the New York Stock Exchange is located. And so we see, again, reading in chapter 18, that they torment, they crying out. Verse 15, the merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every ship master and all the company in ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voices of harpers, musicians, and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee, and the light of a candle or lamp shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom, that speaking specifically of Yeshua, and of the bride, that speaks of his disciples, which compose the church, the true church, those who follow Yeshua, keeping his faith and his commandments. And of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants, notice it keeps emphasizing, this is the merchant Babylon, who deals with the merchants of the earth. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries, that word sorceries is the word pharmakeia, implementing the pharmaceutical industry, which was responsible for the second seal, the red bird or horse being released, called COVID-19. But by thy pharmakeia, pharmaceutical industry, were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. And so with that being the end, Zechariah chapter 5 speaks not only of the destruction of this Babylon in terms of her world government being located there, the United Nations. The first time was the World Trade Center. That was the warning. The beginning of the judgment in the one-fourth judgments on the house of Israel, which is located in North America, namely the United States. Also the rest of the world, but concentrated here where all nations have been coming, just as Joseph's family came to him in Egypt. So they are coming back into this world power called the United States of America. But the world government, the beast government, is the United Nations, which is headquartered in New York. And not only will it be destroyed, but according to Zechariah 5, it's called the house of the thief, New York, where they stole many people, slaves, men stealers of souls, intellectual property, merchandise, people. A lot of those secrets have been shipped out from that location, even going into China. A lot of our technology, a lot of our knowledge, they're still ripping it off. But this has been a center for a lot of this mercantile exchange. But the house of the thief will be destroyed, and it's going to be nuclear, as Zechariah describes it in chapter 5, along with New York along with Washington, D.C. The same targets of the first seal are the targets in the sixth seal at the end of Revelation chapter 6. With the destruction of that head, then the trumpets, after the 144,000, have been prepared. The last act of God in the sixth seal is the sealing of his 144,000 for what is to follow. Because in the seventh seal is open, the trumpets begin to sound. And I would venture to say to you that the great Babylon, merchant Babylon, that has fallen, receives a head wound, but it will live again. And during the trumpets, its activity is going to become even more wicked. Because in the seven trumpets, you might say that is your countdown for 7 years. 3.5 of which are in just chapter 11, the Great Tribulation. But you have a total of about 6 months. 6 months accounted for in the trumpets. So with that, we will end our study on Revelation 18. We will say that there's much more in the prophecies concerning Babylon that are applied. Like if you search in Jeremiah chapter, read the context of Jeremiah chapter 51. We didn't take time today to do that, but if you will go and read it, why it's a dual prophecy of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, ending with the Median Persians taking over. Well, guess who's coming against the United States? Media, Persia, Iraq, Iran, Persia, Iraq. Daniel's burial ground is in Iran, Iraq, where the former Babylon was located, just south of Baghdad. It is where Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. So it's very important to understand who fulfills these roles in the last days and the nations that are the major players. Because Iran is behind all of the mess that's going on right now in the Middle East, particularly concerning Judah, the Jews, and in a lot of the attack that they're going to bring against Israel in North America, who, like Joseph, have gone through slavery and even come to power in this country and have been blessed in this country, but are still not in their homeland. And the prodigal son must return home. That's Joseph's descendants. Judah's already home. What happened in Germany at the time when Germany was brought down at Hitler and the United Nations was formed will be completed as the United Nations headquarters is destroyed in North America, where Israel is located. Basically, Israel is headquartered here, the house of Israel. And the younger son, must come home. And he says to them, come out of her. Not just New York, but all of her that is under her influence. We deal with the basic economic, but there's also a religious aspect. And it's come out of all of these systems of false religion. We've inherited lies. Go back to Jeremiah chapter 16, is it? Around verses 19, read the verses around there. The fishers are going out. The fishing is still going on, but the hunters. Hitler was a hunter. Stalin, hunters. Some of the great men of the earth, they are hunters today. They want to kill many of the people of the earth. And so, the remaining of Babylon will be completely destroyed in all of its activity. That is, government, economic, and religious. When we get to those 16, chapter 16 of Revelation, get to those 7 bowls. Because Yeshua is going to put an end to all of the Babylon. But he's not going to kill all the people. But there are armies and there are leaders that are going to come against him. And under the guise of identifying him as some kind of alien invader, because Satan will be deceiving the people that he's an alien coming back to earth, when the actual aliens are already here operating in the second heaven and on the earth. And they will be forced down at the beginning of the 3.5-year Great Tribulation out of the second heaven, and they're going to be confined to the earth, and it's going to get real nasty. It's going to get, the deception is going to go to its maximum during the time when they're possessing people. Children of God, you got to be baptized in the Holy Spirit, have the communication line, being able to speak in tongues, to have the God uploading and downloading, similar to what a computer does. God does it supernaturally for his people, direct line to heaven, because it's the priesthood. It's the priesthood of the Holy Spirit, Melchizedek, that is going to give us the victory, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit. That's how the mountains of false religion are going to be brought down. The mountains of these kings that have reigned in the earth, it is only by his spirit that they will be conquered by his bride before we ascend to meet the Lord in the air. We will not leave this earth in defeat. We will leave in victory after we've been tried in the fire. And so our end is what you consider like the end of Job. We're going through tribulation. At this point, we're going to stop. If anyone has questions, and next week we'll get into chapter 19, Yeshua's return, because this is where the seal, the seventh seal ends, which is at the end of the seventh seal are the 7 bowls of wrath, is with Yeshua coming to execute the final wrath that he must execute to establish his kingdom. So, any questions, comments?
No one has been muted, so if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask them at this time.
Any questions or comments? We'll begin to conclude on next week the things that happen after the 7 bowls of wrath. That is, with Yeshua, the 7th bowl of wrath concludes. Because what happens in the 6th bowl is the river Euphrates is dried up to allow the kings of the east, that's going to bring China and all the Asian nations and all the nations east of the Euphrates that are aligned against God. The masters, you got the fathers dealing with Catholicism or the Greco-Roman religion, but you have the rabbis, which deals with Judaism, and the Phariseeism, Pharisees, scribes, Pharisees, the hypocrites he spoke of for the woes. But then the final woe is the Eastern nations, what we call the Asian nations, that are going to be united under China's conquest. China not only going to stop with Taiwan, Hong Kong, but they're going to focus on Japan. They're going to focus on all those that have been linked to them by not only their being Asian, but their language being that of an Asian base. And they're going to come, and Yeshua is going to wipe out them and all the nations that are gathered together against Jehovah and his Messiah, his Christ. Why did the heathen rage? The people plotted vain things. Go back and read Psalms 2. It's against Yeshua that they're gathered. And God will have them in derision. So chapter 19, we'll see what Yeshua is going to do, which is tied with Isaiah 63. You want to read it ahead of time, you can read Revelation 19, which is where Yeshua is going to be returning to defeat the armies, and how he's bloodied with the blood of those he's slaughtering. You will see details on that, which is mentioned in chapter 19 of Revelation. In Isaiah, I said 63 verses, just in the first 5 or 6 verses. He's explaining why he's blooded in Revelation 19 in Isaiah. And it mentions nations that he's going to be going through as he in his return. At that time, we, the body of Messiah, Yeshua, his bride, we return with him. And so we'll look at this next week. Until then, you'll have a blessed, if no questions, no comments, have a blessed week in the Lord. And keep in mind, we will be getting the outline prepared to get to you online and by email, and for those who need it in print, we'll get it, make it available to you.